Hangar 3, if you'd like to partake of one of those. I'm getting quick actually because they are so popular. There's often a long queue of people waiting to enjoy a typical English cream tea. But as I say, Hangar 3 is the place to be for those. There and do that. Candle making and butter and cheese making demonstrations will be taking place throughout the day up at the house. There are refreshments on sale as well, and there are tours of the flying programme gets underway. It is a chance to get up close and personal with these historic aircraft. Miles Messenger joining us as a visiting aircraft. It's a rare sight these days. And, that will be flying again in the afternoon as parts of commemoration, I suppose we could call it, of Miles' aircraft early on in the flying programme. You can buy souvenir programmes, but if you want an idea of the aircraft that are scheduled to fly during the course of the afternoon, then just outside the control tower compound you'll find a blackboard. It's all high-tech here at Old Warden, and the blackboard has a list of the times of the various display slots through the afternoon and the aircraft that are due to fly, weather permitting, of course, and at the moment all bodes well. sun glints off the wings of the Salonia Airways Dragon Rapide. The first of our pleasure flighters have enjoyed seeing the Bedfordshire countryside unfold beneath them as they took part in the first of what will be 4 pleasure flights over lunchtime today. The Rapide. And a memory to take away and treasure. Again this weekend, the camping area very busy with people who've dropped in for 1 or 2 nights. You can find out about how you can bring your tent, your caravan, your motorhome to Old Warden and enjoy camping out on the airfield as well as enjoying the air show. And that website, allthews.shuttleworth.org, is also the place to go for information about the collection, about air shows. Won't have organised displays, but you never know what you're likely to see on the ground or in the air if you come on a non-display day. Lovely things about air shows here at Old Warden are when people come on to the airfield in period costumes and through the afternoon from 1400 today. Ahead of that there'll be the vintage vehicle collection. They will be parading along the flight line. A chance to see some very rare examples of machines that were started being collected by Richard Orman, chucking up to Old Warden House to have a look round there, to look at some of the demonstrations like candle making and butter and so on. And you think, well, it'd be a nice walk through the park. Very welcome indeed. The Harvard Warbird trainer touching down on the main runway here at Old Warden, making their way out to the access door to be briefed by the pilot before taking to the skies. Which will be, I think, our 23rd year. And you can find out more during the winter months at allthews.shuttleworth.org.
Leave that up.
I'd like to find out what issues this flag. You mentioned the black board. That's probably upset some members because of the back to school next week.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is 12, this is all original.
Tyres made of what is effectively wrought iron rather than steel. Takes enormous intestinal fortitude. I've actually ridden with Ray along the flight line over the back there by the hangars. It's hard work even on tarmac. You really have to bend yourself into that one. Just ahead of that we have the collection's Forged and wireless truck towing the Bofors gun, which is also of course part of the collection, and will be back in its display position after the parade where production. And that's just coming past me now, followed by the Jowett, which is a flat twin water-cooled one. Actually the saloon was found quite close to the quite close to the collection and needed very little work other than a bit of a tidy up and a respray to make it show worthy. And the open tourer behind it, as you can see, is now in dark green, although that wasn't the colour it was in when it was brought here, but when the vehicle was stripped down, that was the base coat found, so that was obviously its original colour, and it has now been restored to that. So the Railton now just coming through at the Topolino, followed by a Hillman Minx 1939 1200cc side valve car that's painted in Royal Air Force bomb disposal unit colours. And then the MGTA just behind it, the black MG, was actually the personal transport of Richard Shuttleworth up to his untimely death. The TA was the very first of the line of what became known as but there was a problem and it was replaced just before the outbreak of war by the MGTB, of which only a few dozen remained. The TC, which came out just after the war, is mostly notable for being about 6 inches wide, although you really have to put them side by side to notice. Now just behind that is a car which I can pick up on the way back, which is obviously unexpected. But behind that you have the McCurd lorry, which was made in 1913 by a Scotsman from Cripplewood, North London. Mr. McCurd was a Scotsman who moved down to North London, set up a factory, and about 1,500 of those vehicles actually served during the First World War as basic three-ton open lorries. But as you can see, this one's been restored as a closed vehicle, and the name on the side, of course, would be familiar to most people as half of Tate Lar Sugar. And the colouring of the delivery is essentially the result of the fact that the company sponsored its restoration. Behind that we have the wireless truck with the Bofors, and then Ray and his companion valiantly pedalling what actually turns out to be an 1882 Starley quadricycle, a sociable quadricycle, as you can see, side-by-side seating as opposed to a tandem where people sit one behind the other. Ray was able to date it more accurately because up until now the collection had it listed as 1878, but it turns out that that particular model was not built before 1880. I know it may sound a bit picky, but we do like to get things right where possible. So the vehicles are turning at the top, they will be making another run. You can certainly pick out the steamer here because it's the only one where bearing in mind, of course, that in the early parts of the phenomenon that we now think of as the motor age, steam cars were almost as popular as petrol-driven vehicles. They did have certain advantages in the fact that they were very quiet and much quicker, of course, in many respects, because it's a not very well-known fact that in 1907, a certain Fred Marriott, driving a highly streamlined Stanley steam car, set a lap speed record of 27 miles, which in theory is now Stuart's car has a water-tube boiler. I didn't get around miles to what's the top speed it can do, but I would guess it's probably around about 40 miles per hour, which for the standards of the day is fairly quick. Anyway, the Jeep will be leaving the parade again. One of the things that keeps this collection running, of course, is that people who work here are not just enthusiasts but also collectors. So it looks like Stuart's decided he's going to leave now, so he's just overtaken the Jeep. And Stuart's decided to open it up a bit, you must have heard me. And you can see what I mean now about how quiet it is. Almost as quiet as an electric. The engine is coupled directly to the rear wheels in the same way as it is connected to the wheels of the steam locomotive, railway locomotive. Very much the same thing. Richard Martin there in the Jeep. He's in a time warp today because he's wearing World War I uniform driving a World War II vehicle. But we allow that sort of thing, and we have Tim King in the pile of Vasseur. Tim is actually one of the most gifted mechanics here. He did almost all the restoration on the Dietrich. Also solved the gearbox problem on the pile of Vasseur. I'm not sure whether or not it's the case, but he may be the first to also fitted electric condition to the pile around here. So Steve Hart is bringing Stuart's bomb teacher. As you can see, he's got a couple of rather colourful passengers as well. Studebaker following that, with a rather well-dressed World War I gentleman in the driver's seat, followed by the Bean, and then the little Jowett coming through. As I was saying, flat twin water-cooled engine. Very popular as cheap transport back in the 20s and early 30s, many of them with builders' vans, as of course were the Trojans. Trojan, of course, was notable for being a two-stroke, as was the Topolino of Mrs. Dorothy Shuttleworth. The two oldest aircraft in the collection, the Blériot and the Depot-Dussin, and he donated them to Richard Shuttleworth when he realised what he was trying to do with the collection here. While these guys are coming back, I do feel that in the light of the amount of work, appreciated in reciprocity. I've seen the condition from photographs of some of these vehicles when they were acquired by the collection, and it's incredible what's been done with some of them.
I like that joke that you said, I'm going to the customer. That's good.
There's some very long hours put in here, several days a week. I mean, by people who are, as you can see, for the most part, you know, past retirement age. And it's nice to get waved at, by the way. Thank you very much.
Let's take him off.
Yeah, we'll take him off. Hello.
See whether there'll be short calls while the Dragon Rapide takes off. So motorcycles turn, they're just back past the armed aircraft further up the field.
Oh, it's yours. It's yours.
Unfortunately, we are limited to the number of motorcycles in the parade by the number of people we have who are qualified riders, because needless to say, given the fact that some of the vehicles are quite valuable, we only allow fully qualified motorcyclists to ride them, and the sidecars are only allowed to be ridden by people who have sidecar experience, because obviously it's a very different style of riding. Then the Triumph SD. I do fancy a Gull. The not big four I have actually had a Gull, as I have also the Sunbeam and an M20. The Sunbeam is beautiful to ride, very, very smooth. The Norton actually has solo gearing on, which makes it a little bit difficult to get underway, but unfortunately the owner doesn't want it changed, so it has to be what it is.
I can get all the tiring, don't worry. Flying out
Incredibly efficient machine, this. 210 horsepower from the de Havilland Gypsy Queen 2 in the nose of the aircraft, and yet a maximum speed of 230 miles an hour. Very, very specialist machine. Only 6 built, in fact. Largely because of that, it's a single-roll aircraft, this one. It was designed by Edgar Percival mainly to enter and win the King's Cup Air Race. It was derived from his Gull design, the earlier design. Nowadays you can just hop on an airliner, you can be there in about 18 hours. But in those days, of course, no GPS, it was all done on map and compass navigation. the Shuttleworth collection. This isn't a replica, this isn't an aircraft that's been painted into the colours of Alec Henshaw's aircraft. This is the actual one. As I said, that is one of the great joys of the Shuttleworth collection. It's an extremely historic aircraft, but still really being put through her paces here today. Into landing attitude, the nose comes up, it being a tailwheel aircraft of course. You can't actually see a thing in front of you, you're looking down two little tunnels on either side of the nose at about 45 degrees. In and out of the cockpit and the forward fuselage. Got a famous ailment known as Lancaster shin. A number of people who bark their shins getting over the spars. But underneath, enormous 33-foot long bomber, of course, carrying one player, later on in the war, 5,500 pounds, 22,000 pounds, tall buoyant grandstand bombers. Our Lance Wallace. Never been to Royal Air Force Coningsby, I can heartily recommend a visit to the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight Hangar.
Lancasters during the Second World War are mind-boggling. Lancasters flew between them 160,000 missions. They dropped 50 million incendiary bombs, 608,000 tons of explosives. And raids were typically made up of 800 to 1,000 aircraft at a time. Now, earlier in the season, we had 7 C-47 Skytrains here on the ground, and they took off in line astern rather, took off into the skies and flew around, and to see half a dozen of those machines together was quite a sight. It's honoured and commemorated every time the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight Lancaster takes to the skies. Ladies and gentlemen, lest we forget.
God, she never stops smiling. She's a sight for sore eyes.
Flight Lieutenants Nick Farrell and Paul Wise flying the Lancaster for us today from Battle of Britain Memorial Flights, as I said, up there in Coningsby. It's a wonderful place to visit, not just the Lancaster of course, but an increasing number of Spitfires, Hurricanes, Dakota, a pair of Chipmunks, all in this beautiful hangar with a visitor centre attached.
Battle of Britain Memorial Flight established in 1957. This particular Lancaster joined the flight in 1973, having been built in 1948, too late to see combat. Just too late to see combat in Europe. It had been dead, along with the Spitfires and Hurricanes of the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, all volunteers. They're all serving personnel elsewhere in the Royal Air Force, and they give up usually 3 weekends out of 4 from May to about October to take part in air shows to commemorate and preserve the memory of those who gave so much in those dark days of the Second World War.
The original Manchester design, of course, by a pair of Rolls-Royce Vultures. That, the development of that design, the Lancaster, of course, for Rolls-Royce Merlins. Wonderful sound. Talking of wonderful sounds, just getting airborne, aircraft manned by its nickname of Pilkarprov Combine Harvester.
From the Soviet Union, the Pilkarprov PO2, and from the United Kingdom, the Westland Lysander, which has been built, but it's certainly more than 40,000, which is an incredible statistic for a little biplane like this.
Much later design, this particular one built by Westland Aircraft in '36, designed of course by Teddy Petter and Arthur Davenport.
The Lysander had been a frontline aircraft but showed not to belong to task. But the aircraft then came into its own, flying secret agents or Joes into occupied Europe and behind enemy lines, often from bases in this neck of the woods, and therefore flew into the history books as a clandestine nocturnal air taxi, if you will.
PO2 showing its remarkable slow speed manoeuvrability, particularly in the wind. Very distinctive noise you can hear. It's a 115 horsepower Shvestov M11D 5-cylinder radial engine.
PO2, best known as the famous Soviet squadron of white wings, made up entirely of female pilots and ground crews. Their role was really to harass the Germans on the Eastern Front, and they very quickly proved themselves to be fearful adversaries against the hearts and minds of the German troops in the trenches.
Just in comparison between the two aircraft, only 115 horsepower.
rumble of the Mercury engine up front on the Lysander, and that very peculiar wing in platform there against the blue sky. Almost prehistoric and insect-like. I know I always say that when the Lysander flies, but there is no better description, I don't think.
As Mark was saying, most famous for its role as a clandestine taxi, but before then, it was designed to act as an army coordination. The advent of such fighters as the 109 paid to that. Gunners, but it was its very short field takeoff performance that enabled it to take off and land in these very small fields, lit only by the light of 3 torches, to deliver agents and equipment to the resistance in France and the Low Countries. And of course, you didn't know until you landed who was holding the torches. So a very, very risky business, because if you were caught flying an aircraft carrying a member of the resistance or a spy, that made you a spy too under international law, and they could just shoot you. So very, very brave people who flew these aircraft.
Hope he gets there before it rains.
Designed by Curtis Pitts, who worked as a carpenter on the US Railroad, and at the time of designing the Pitts, he had never flown as a pilot. He'd only made models of aircraft, and this was his first aircraft design, and he more or less got it right first time round, which is pretty unusual, because although the avionics have been improved, the components and what they're made of have been improved over the years, and the engines, of course, most particularly have been uprated and improved over the decades. The basic design principle has remained the same since 1945. And he's now firmly established on the airshow circuit as a display pilot in the Pitts 12. And every time he takes to the skies in the pits 12, he will remind himself that it was a long, hard slog over 5 years to build this aircraft from scratch. With the intention of putting it through display routines and air shows like the vintage display here this afternoon. That's why some of them are apparently hidden away in the twigs on the bottom. The sound of those Havilland machines in the skies.
Oh, that's one of Joy's. You might not know this, but the big paddock at the end there didn't used to be part of the airfield. And the reason why it's been extended into that is to give us the ability to fly very light aircraft, particularly in these strong winds, particularly when it's across the main runway. So yeah, they're obviously hidden them up there with the First World Warers. DH-60 Moth, famous at George
3, and is the oldest surviving example of a de Havilland aircraft that is still airworthy and in existence.
Dates back to 1924, only 3 of those were built. But what a sound.
Undertaken by the Chipmunk and the Rapide. You can imagine how difficult it is holding in formation on a day like today with the wind conditions such as they are.
DH-51 by an air disco.
First aircraft to be registered in the country of Kenya in Africa, owned by John Carberry, who was a coffee bean farmer at the time.
Intended to carry either 2 or 3 people, the H-51. Front cockpit capable of carrying 2 side by side, but only, I have been advised, if you're terribly friendly.
I was to say, both you and I wouldn't get in the cockpit of one of those together, would we? We'd never get it.
I'd get in one on my own, to be honest.
Far side of the airfield above the windsock, you will see the Chipmunk in Joker mode doing some light, graceful aerobatics as our biplanes return. 16X Moth, this is built in the very first aircraft that Richard Shuttleworth bought, learned to fly in.
Wanted to bring flight to the masses and produce light aircraft people could afford to fly. The H-51 with its big World War I V8 was far too expensive to operate. That was why they started producing you'll see that the Moths are much smaller than the H-51 in front. The ethos behind it was to produce an aeroplane that would fit in a standard council house garage with the wings folded. So you didn't even need to hangar it. 3860 Cirrus Moth. It's a 60 horsepower Cirrus 4-cylinder, I've been told. From 1925 onwards. And they were to be used by record-breaking pilots all over the world. And they really made the name of the Havilland aviation.
With that little aerial ballet off the runway, the Havilland Chipmunk, chosen as the replacement ab initio trainer by the Royal Air Force, the Navy and the Army Air Corps as well. 1,005 of them being designated to the Royal Air Force, the remainder being used by the Fleet Air Arm and the Army Air Corps as basic trainers for future pilots. Chipmunk offering one or two improvements on Moth.
Fascinating to look at the two Moths followed by the target. If you look earlier model Moth, you'll see that the Moth is a Royal Air Force trainer. The Royal Air Force said, well, the occupant in the front cockpit's going to have a hard time getting in and out wearing a parachute. So to get the Tiger Moth, what they did was they moved the top wing forward, which meant to keep the centre of lift and the centre of gravity in the same place, they had to sweep the wings. Now, the trouble is, that meant that the bottom the tips of the bottom wing could drag along the ground very easily, so they had to give the bottom wing some dihedral, and that's how you get that famous shape at the back of this warship.
The longest continuous association of any private aircraft in one continent. It's also the plane that Richard took his mother Dorothy up in for her first flight over rural Bedfordshire. She took apparently quite a lot of persuading to get into the front cockpit, but once she landed, she was thrilled. Private operators who bought up the ex-military aircraft. They were also popular as glider tugs as well, often being re-engined with a Lycoming engine up front, which meant some changes to the engine cowling arrangement on the front, but still unmistakably a Chipmunk. And those aircraft still doing sterling service at places like Husbands Bosworth up in Leicestershire, towing gliders along. The engine powering up now as the Collections Gloucester Gladiator trundles down runway 21, ready to get airborne for its display slot, to be followed by three magnificent fighting flying machines from the dark days of the Second World War. The Collections the Sea Hurricane, and also the Hurricane Tango Tango.
Have a good look at the rudder, because if it's got a squared off rudder, then it's the prototype of the kite. The one with a rounded rudder is a Ocean Series aircraft. Two quite rare gliders here, both cast off. to bounce the signal off to get a return. And so one of the things that the Kirby Kites are used for is towing up and down the coast of England and getting radar systems, radar stations along the coast and look at them to see whether or not they could actually see them, which they could, fortunately.
Fred Slingsby built the Kites prototype in 1935, first flew in August of that year. This particular example of the Kite prototype was on a trailer, falling to pieces quite literally. The casing glue was disintegrating and the wooden airframe and the plywood covering was just peeling away. And it languished on this trailer for something like 40 years. It was finally bought by David Underwood in 2009, and with his father Peter they set about restoring it to flying condition, which they did over a 7-year period. We're told that it's a delight to fly, as indeed are all Kites.
Gliders, yes indeed, is one of them. The firm of Grunau, southwest corner of Berlin, very close to where Shuttleworth Airport is now. The Grunau Baby. Fred Slingsby actually took a good look at a baby and developed the Kirby Kite flight based on the wing. Very, very, very efficient. Glide ratio of 21, which means it will travel 21 metres forward for every one it comes down.
Of course, through the back door, because of the way that Germany was producing gliders and using them for training in clubs around the country, a lot of the future Luftwaffe pilots would have got their first taste of flying and perfected some of their early basic skills on gliders at these private clubs around Germany. They thought half a dozen people would turn up to this meeting in London. It turned out that 56 people made the effort to get to the meeting, and it was then decided that there was enough interest to actually form an official association to oversee the sport of gliding in the United Kingdom. The second anniversary Super Cubs, our visiting cub, and our collection cub coming in with its very distinctive registration number.
Dave Bramall flying the Collections Cup.
Christine Bell flying the visiting Super Cub. The Cubs lend themselves superbly to glider towing, along with the Chipmunks that I mentioned earlier. Very popular with gliding clubs around the world to get their sailplanes aloft.
Very well named, very well registered, the visiting companies, Chipmunk. And Richard and Graham doing a wonderful job. Graham Saw, what a great name for a glider. Doing a super job landing kites up a hill right next to where their trailers are being towed to clear the mud back. And in this winter, they are remarkable this
Like a Super Cub derivative of the original J3 Cubs.